No one must know, warned the nun, but what the mountain man did shocked everyone. The sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks of the mountains when the villagers of Alderwood began their day. Mist curled around the tall pine trees, and the sound of a distant river echoed softly through the valley. It was a quiet place, where life moved slowly and everyone knew each other. People tended to their small farms, helped their neighbors, and followed the rhythms of nature. Yet underneath this calm, there were whispers of mysteries and old stories that nobody dared to speak about. In the center of the village stood a small stone chapel. Its walls were weathered and covered with ivy, and inside lived Sister Agnes, a nun who had devoted her life to helping others. She had lived in Alderwood for as long as anyone could remember. People came to her when they were sick, when they were troubled, or when they needed guidance. Her face, lined with age but still gentle, was known to every villager. Her eyes held wisdom, but also a sadness that nobody could fully understand. That morning, Sister Agnes called the villagers to the chapel. Her voice, though soft, carried urgency. She spoke with a seriousness that made even the bravest among them pause. "I have something important to tell you," she said. "There is a secret hidden deep in the mountains. It is not meant for anyone to know. No one must go there. No one must try to uncover it. It is too dangerous." The villagers exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered to each other, curiosity shining in their eyes. Others looked fearful, remembering the old stories of people who had disappeared in the mountains. It was a place where the weather could change in an instant, where paths vanished, and where strange sounds were heard at night. Sister Agnes's warning was not taken lightly. Among the villagers, there was one man who paid close attention. Elias was known as the Mountain Man. He lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of the forest, far from the village. People often called him wild or strange. Children were warned not to go near him, and many adults avoided him. He was tall, strong, and had sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He had lived in the mountains for so long that he understood their moods, their dangers, and their secrets better than anyone else. Elias had always respected Sister Agnes. Her kindness and wisdom were known even to those who stayed away from the chapel. But when he heard her warning, something inside him stirred. It was not fear that pushed him, it was curiosity. The mountains had always called to him, whispering in the wind and rustling in the leaves. Now, with the nun's words echoing in his mind, he felt a pull stronger than ever before. After the gathering, Elias walked back to his cabin through the narrow forest paths. The morning light filtered through the tall trees, casting patterns on the ground. Birds chirped softly, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wet earth. As he walked, he thought about the warning. "Too dangerous," he murmured. But what is it that must remain hidden? He knew the mountains like the back of his hand. He had climbed every cliff, crossed every stream, and explored every hidden valley. Yet he realized that even he did not know everything. There were areas so deep and remote that even he had never ventured there. Perhaps, he thought, that is where the secret lay. Life in the village went on. Farmers worked in their fields, children played near the river, and traders came from nearby valleys to sell goods. But a quiet tension lingered in the air. People spoke less openly now, glancing toward the mountains as if expecting something to appear. Some wondered if the nun had finally lost her mind, but deep down, they felt a shiver of fear. Elias spent the rest of the day preparing. He gathered his gear, sturdy boots, a worn leather satchel, a knife for protection, and a small rope for climbing. He packed food and water, knowing that the mountains could be unforgiving. As evening fell, he lit a small fire outside his cabin and sat silently, staring at the darkening peaks. Stars began to appear, one by one, twinkling above the sharp silhouettes of the mountains. The night was quiet, but Elias could feel the heartbeat of the forest around him. He thought about the villagers. Many of them were afraid of him because they did not understand his life in the mountains. They called him a loner, but he had never felt lonely. The forest and the peaks were his companions. They taught him lessons that no human could, and they showed him paths that no map could. Yet tonight, even he felt a mix of excitement and unease. The nun's warning was heavy in his mind, but the mystery was heavier. That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay on his cot, listening to the wind whispering through the trees. Every now and then, he imagined shapes moving in the darkness outside, shadows that could be animals or something else entirely. He reminded himself to stay calm. Curiosity, he knew, could be dangerous, but it could also lead to discovery. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Elias set out. He moved quietly through the forest, his steps careful, avoiding broken branches and loose stones. The path led him deeper than he had ever gone before. The trees grew taller and closer together, and the air became cooler and damper. Birds that he had never seen before flitted among the branches. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, some familiar, some completely new. As he climbed higher, the village disappeared from view. He could no longer see the river or the fields. Only mountains and forests stretched endlessly in every direction. The wind picked up, carrying a scent that was both earthy and strange, as if the mountains themselves were alive. Elias paused for a moment and looked around. Everything was silent except for the whisper of the wind. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He came across old carvings on rocks, symbols that he did not recognize. Some were worn and faded, others were fresh, as if someone had been there recently. Elias touched them lightly, feeling the grooves beneath his fingers. They seemed to tell a story, a message left behind by someone long ago. Who could have carved these? And why here deep in the mountains? Questions swirled in his mind, but he pressed on. By midday, Elias reached a narrow gorge. Water trickled down the rocks, forming small pools that reflected the sky. He noticed a hidden path winding up the cliffside, almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. His heart beat faster. The path seemed dangerous, but he trusted his instincts. Carefully, he began to climb, placing his hands and feet on every hold he could find. The rocks were slippery, and one wrong move could send him tumbling, but he moved with confidence born from years in the mountains. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the cliffs, Elias reached a plateau. There, partially hidden by thick shrubs, he saw a dark opening, a cave. A faint glow seemed to come from inside. His curiosity overcame his caution. He approached slowly, feeling both excitement and fear. The nun's warning echoed in his mind. No one must know. Elias paused at the entrance. The cave smelled of damp earth and something else he could not identify. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip on his satchel, and stepped inside. The walls glistened with moisture and the glow grew stronger. It was faint, almost magical, yet it seemed real. Shadows danced across the walls as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Inside, Elias noticed shapes that looked like old chests, bundles of paper, and objects that seemed very old. He could not believe what he saw. He reached out carefully and touched one of the manuscripts. The paper was fragile, yet the writing was clear. It told stories of people long gone, of events that had shaped the village in ways no one knew. Secrets that had been buried for decades, or perhaps centuries, were hidden here, away from prying eyes. Elias felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. He understood now why Sister Agnes had warned everyone. This was not just a hidden cave. It was a place of knowledge and power, a place that could change the lives of the villagers forever if revealed. Yet, he also felt a strange sense of destiny. Perhaps he had been meant to find this place. He stayed in the cave until nightfall, examining the manuscripts and artifacts. He could see letters, maps, and drawings, all telling pieces of a story long forgotten. Each item made him more aware of the importance of what lay before him. The weight of the secret pressed down on him, but it did not scare him. Instead, it gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. As Elias left the cave and made his way back down the mountain, The stars twinkled above, silent witnesses to his discovery. He knew that life in Alderwood would never be the same if this secret were revealed. Yet he also knew that some decisions could not wait, and some mysteries were meant to be faced, no matter the risk. That night, as he lay in his cabin, Elias thought about the nun, about the village, and about the mountains. The secret was his to carry, at least for now. But deep in his heart, he knew that the story was only beginning, and that what he had found would soon change everything, for him, for the villagers, and for the mountains themselves. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Alderwood, painting the mountains in soft shades of gold and pink. Elias woke with a restless energy. The cave he had discovered the day before occupied his thoughts completely. He could still see the faint glow in his mind, the fragile manuscripts, and the mysterious carvings on the walls. Every detail felt vivid, and yet the questions were endless. Why had the secret been hidden? Who had left these artifacts in the cave? And most importantly, what would happen if the villagers ever found out? Elias knew he could not rush. The discovery was fragile, like a delicate bird, and he had to be careful. He packed his satchel, double-checking that he had ropes, food, water, and a small lantern in case the glow inside the cave was insufficient. He left his cabin quietly, not wanting anyone to see him. The villagers had already begun their daily routines, working in the fields, tending to animals, or walking along the narrow paths leading to the river. Most of them would not have noticed him even if he had passed in plain sight. The forest greeted him with its familiar sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of birds, and the gentle murmur of the river far below. Elias moved swiftly and silently, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, feeling the cold dampness of the morning air. The higher he climbed, the thinner the air became, and the harder it was to breathe. But with each step he felt closer to the mystery, closer to the truth that had been buried for decades. As he approached the plateau where the cave entrance waited, Elias paused. The wind had picked up, whistling through the trees and tugging at his clothes. The shadows of the mountains shifted, making the rocks appear alive. He adjusted his satchel and checked his rope one more time before stepping forward. The cave entrance was partially hidden behind a thick curtain of shrubs, just as he remembered. It felt like stepping into another world, one separate from the life of the village. Inside, the cave smelled of damp earth, moss, and something older he could not identify. The faint glow he had seen yesterday seemed stronger in the daylight, casting long shadows across the rough walls. Elias moved carefully, placing his hands on the cool stone for support. He approached the chest first, its old wood cracked but sturdy, and gently lifted the lid. Inside, he found a collection of manuscripts, maps, and letters tied with faded ribbons. Each item seemed fragile, as if it could crumble at the slightest touch. Elias opened the first manuscript and began to read. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant, and careful. The words told stories of the village's founders, stories that were not in the official records. There were accounts of sacrifices made to protect the village, of secret alliances with people from distant lands, and even warnings about dangers that could arise from the mountains. Some passages were vague, others detailed, but all of them hinted at a truth that had been deliberately hidden. As he read, Elias realized how deep the secret ran. It was not just a collection of old stories. It was a record of the village's history, a history that could change everything the villagers believed about themselves. Some families had been involved in actions that were shameful, others in acts of bravery that had been forgotten. The manuscripts spoke of treasures and dangers, of paths in the mountains that led to safety and paths that led to disaster. Every word made him more aware of the responsibility he now carried. He carefully moved to the letters next. Some were addressed to people long gone, written in urgent tones, warning them of danger, instructing them on what must never be revealed. One letter in particular caught his attention. It was addressed to the village elder, written by someone claiming to have seen the mountain's hidden power firsthand. The letter described strange lights, deep caverns, and unusual sounds that seemed almost alive. It spoke of knowledge that could protect the village if used wisely, but could destroy it if mishandled. Elias leaned back against the cool stone wall and thought about Sister Agnes. She had warned everyone to stay away, and now he understood why. The secret was dangerous, but it was also a gift. In the wrong hands, it could bring chaos, fear, or even death. Yet in the right hands, it could save lives, guide decisions, and help the village thrive. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him. He felt both awe and fear, knowing that he was no longer just a mountain man wandering alone. He had become the keeper of a legacy. He spent the rest of the day in the cave, carefully examining each artifact. There were tools he did not recognize, maps with strange markings, and small carvings that seemed to tell a story in pictures rather than words. Some of the carvings appeared to be warnings, others directions, and some symbols that he could not decipher. Elias touched each item gently, careful not to damage anything. He felt as if he were walking through a museum of secrets, a place where time itself had stopped. As night approached, the glow in the cave dimmed. Elias packed what he could carry, taking only a few of the manuscripts and letters that seemed most important. He left the rest carefully arranged, as if they were sleeping, waiting for someone to return. Stepping out into the cold night air, he looked at the village far below, its lights twinkling softly in the distance. He felt a strange connection between the mountains, the secret, and the people who lived there. Over the next few days, Elias returned to the cave multiple times. Each visit revealed more layers of the mystery. He discovered old journals that described the lives of villagers from generations ago, their struggles, their triumphs, and their mistakes. He found maps that showed hidden paths, secret passages, and places where nature itself had been used as a protector. Every discovery deepened his understanding and increased his sense of duty. He also noticed that some markings in the cave were recent. Footprints in the dust, scratches on the walls, and symbols that had been freshly carved suggested that someone else had been there. Elias wondered who it could be, another seeker of knowledge, or someone intending harm. The thought made him more cautious. He realized that he could not act recklessly. The secret demanded patience, observation, and wisdom. During this time, Elias also reflected on the villagers. Many of them were kind, hardworking, and unaware of the dangers lurking in the mountains. They trusted the land, the river, and the forests, but they did not know the full story. He realized that some truths could protect them, while others could destroy their peace. He had to decide how much to reveal, when, and to whom. Every decision carried weight, and he understood that mistakes could be costly. One evening, as a storm gathered over the mountains, Elias sat outside his cabin, reading by lantern light. The wind howled through the trees, and the first drops of rain began to fall. He felt a chill, not from the weather but from the enormity of his task. The secret he had discovered was alive, in a way, shaping his thoughts, guiding his actions, and testing his courage. He realized that life in Alderwood would never be the same. Yet despite the fear and the responsibility, Elias felt a sense of purpose he had never known. The mountains had chosen him, or perhaps he had chosen them. Either way, he understood that he could not turn back. He had to continue exploring, learning, and preparing. The secret was more than just a hidden truth. It was a key to the survival and future of the village. Days turned into weeks, and Elias became more skilled at navigating the cave and the surrounding mountains. He memorized paths, noted changes in the weather, and studied the symbols carefully. He began to understand the logic behind the carvings, the reason for the hidden passages, and the importance of the manuscripts. Each day brought new discoveries and new challenges, but he faced them with patience and determination. He also began to think about how he might one day share the secret. Who could be trusted? How could the knowledge be used wisely? Elias realized that he had to balance the need for caution with the need for action. The mountains had their own rules, and he had to follow them if he wanted to protect the village. He could feel the presence of those who had hidden the secret before him, guiding him silently through the shadows. By the end of this part of his journey, Elias had not only discovered the hidden truth, but had also discovered something about himself. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. He understood the value of patience, the importance of observation, and the weight of responsibility. Most of all, he understood that some secrets were not meant to be buried forever. They were meant to be handled with care, wisdom, and respect. As Elias looked out over the mountains, the village lights glowing softly below, he made a silent promise to himself. He would protect the secret, learn from it, and when the time was right, use it to safeguard the people he had come to care for. The mystery of the mountains was far from over, and the true journey had only just begun. Days passed, and Elias continued his careful exploration of the mountains. Each morning, he rose before dawn, feeling the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. He moved silently through the forest, listening to the whispers of the wind, the distant calls of birds, and the soft rustle of leaves. The village below seemed peaceful, unaware of the hidden dangers and long-forgotten secrets buried in the mountains. Yet Elias knew that peace could be fragile, and knowledge carried a weight far heavier than most could imagine. The manuscripts, letters, and symbols he had discovered weighed heavily on his mind. Each night, he studied them by the light of a lantern in his small cabin. Some passages described acts of bravery, while others told of betrayal, hidden alliances, and secrets that had been carefully guarded for generations. One recurring theme stood out. The mountains were not just a physical barrier. They were a protector, a keeper of knowledge, and a warning of what could happen if humans were careless. Elias began to understand the moral complexity of the secret. It was not simply about hiding or revealing information. It was about balance, timing, and understanding the consequences of every action. If he revealed too much, he could cause fear, conflict, or even harm to the villagers. But if he remained silent, he risked leaving them unprepared for dangers that might return. He felt a constant tension in his heart, a pull between caution and the desire to act. One afternoon, as Elias returned from the cave, he noticed unusual activity in the village. A small group of villagers had gathered near the river, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were tense and their movements careful. He could sense worry in the air, though he could not yet understand its source. The villagers' concern reminded him of the urgency of his task. Secrets, after all, could not remain hidden forever, and time was a silent but relentless force. That evening, Elias sat by the fire in his cabin, reading a letter he had found in the cave. It was addressed to the village elder and written by someone long gone. The words were urgent, warning of dangers that could arise if the knowledge of the mountains was misused. The letter spoke of hidden passages, natural traps, and unusual occurrences that had been observed over generations. Elias realized that these warnings were not just historical accounts, they were instructions for survival. As he pondered the letter, a sense of unease settled over him. He understood why Sister Agnes had been so insistent. The secret was dangerous, and yet it was necessary. It demanded careful thought, precise action, and patience. Elias felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him, heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. He could not afford mistakes. Every decision mattered, and the wrong choice could have devastating consequences. Over the next few days, Elias began to observe the village more closely. He watched the children play near the river, the farmers tend to their crops, and the traders move goods between houses. Everything seemed ordinary, yet he knew that beneath the surface, the potential for danger existed. The mountains, with their hidden paths and secrets, were a constant reminder that life in Alderwood was connected to forces beyond human control. One night, as a storm approached, Elias climbed to the top of a ridge overlooking the village. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the peaks and valleys. He felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. The mountains seemed alive, watching him, testing him. He thought about the manuscripts and letters, about the carvings in the cave, and about the warnings left by those who had come before him. The storm mirrored the turmoil in his mind, the clash between caution and action, secrecy and truth, fear and courage. Elias knew he had to make a decision. The secret of the mountains was no longer a simple curiosity. It had become a matter of survival. If he ignored it, he risked leaving the villagers vulnerable. If he acted recklessly, he could create panic or even disaster. He spent hours pacing his cabin, considering every possibility, weighing the outcomes, and imagining the consequences. Each scenario carried risk, and yet he could not remain idle. The turning point came when Elias discovered a map tucked inside one of the manuscripts. The map showed areas of the mountains that were unstable, paths that could collapse, and regions where landslides were likely. Some areas were marked with symbols he had seen in the cave, indicating danger or protection. It became clear to him that the secret was not just about history, it was practical knowledge, essential for protecting the village from natural disasters. With this realization, Elias felt the urgency of action. He could no longer wait indefinitely. The villagers' safety depended on his ability to interpret the secret and act wisely. Yet he also knew that revealing too much, too soon, could cause fear and misunderstanding. He needed a plan, a way to protect them without overwhelming them. The moral dilemma weighed on him heavily. How much should he reveal? When? And to whom? Elias began preparing carefully. He revisited the cave, studying the manuscripts and symbols in detail. He practiced navigating the hidden paths shown on the maps, testing his knowledge of the terrain and identifying potential hazards. He made notes, drew sketches, and created a mental plan of how he could guide the villagers if danger arose. Every step required caution, skill, and patience. One wrong move could lead to disaster. During this period, he also reflected on his own life. Living alone in the mountains had taught him self-reliance, observation, and courage. But it had also isolated him from others, making him wary of human nature and the complexities of social interaction. He realized that sharing the secret would require not only physical skill, but also diplomacy, trust, and empathy. The task was more challenging than any climb, any storm, or any wilderness trial he had faced. One evening, as Elias prepared to return from the cave, he noticed fresh footprints in the dust. They were small, careful, and deliberate. Someone else had been there recently. The realization made his heart race. Was it a villager who had dared to explore the mountains, or someone with intentions that might threaten the secret? Elias could not ignore the possibility. He knew he had to act with even greater caution. The presence of another person added a new layer of complexity to the moral dilemma he faced. Despite the growing tension, Elias remained calm and methodical. He revisited the letters, manuscripts, and maps, analyzing every detail. He cross-referenced the warnings with his own observations of the terrain and the village. Slowly, a clearer picture began to emerge. The mountains were a protector, yes, but they also demanded respect. The secret was a tool, a guide, and a warning all at once. To use it wisely required intelligence, patience, and courage. Elias spent long nights thinking about the villagers. They were simple, kind people, unaware of the hidden forces that surrounded them. Some would react with fear, others with skepticism, and some might be careless. He realized that revealing the secret required careful planning and timing. He could not simply tell everyone at once. He had to choose the right moment, the right people, and the right way to convey the knowledge. As days turned into weeks, the moral dilemma grew more intense. Elias found himself torn between secrecy and action, observation and intervention. Every decision felt monumental. He knew that life in Alderwood could be changed forever depending on his choices. The manuscripts had given him knowledge, the maps had given him direction, and the cave had given him access to a world few had seen. But with this knowledge came responsibility, and the burden of responsibility weighed heavily on him. One cold morning, as snow began to fall lightly on the peaks, Elias climbed to a high ridge and looked over the village. The fields were quiet, the river shimmered, and the smoke from chimneys rose slowly into the cold air. He felt the full weight of his role. He was no longer just a mountain man living in solitude. He was a guardian, a keeper of secrets, and a protector of lives. The decision he made now would shape the future of Alderwood for generations to come. That night, Elias sat by the fire, reviewing every piece of information he had gathered. He thought about the footprints in the cave, the warnings in the letters, and the dangerous paths marked on the maps. He realized that knowledge alone was not enough. Wisdom, timing, and careful judgment were essential. The moral dilemma was not just about what to reveal, it was about when, how, and to whom. Every choice carried consequences, and mistakes could be disastrous. As he drifted to sleep, Elias made a silent promise to himself. He would honor the wisdom of those who had hidden the secret, respect the power of the mountains, and protect the villagers. But he also knew that he could not remain passive forever. The time would come to act, and when it did, he had to be ready. The secret was not just a burden, it was a responsibility, a duty, and perhaps even a calling. The morning began like any other in Alderwood, with mist curling around the mountains and birds calling from the treetops. Villagers moved about their daily chores, tending to their animals and working in the fields. Yet beneath the calm surface, a tension lingered, an unease that even they could not name. It was a quiet warning, the kind that only people who truly understood the mountains could sense. Elias, now accustomed to carrying the weight of the secret, had been awake since before dawn. He had spent the night reviewing the maps and manuscripts, thinking through every possible scenario. He had planned for hidden dangers, sudden storms, and treacherous terrain. But what he could not have anticipated was the fire. It started in a small patch of dry grass near the edge of the village, where the wind had been blowing strongly. A spark, perhaps from a neglected hearth or a sudden lightning strike, ignited the dry blades. At first it was barely noticeable, just a small flicker at the edge of the trees. But the wind was fierce and it spread quickly, licking at the edges of cottages and barns. Smoke rose in thick columns, darkening the morning sky, and the crackle of flames soon filled the air. Villagers ran in panic, trying desperately to contain the fire. Buckets of water were passed from hand to hand, but the flames moved faster than anyone could keep up with. Some tried to save their belongings, while others worked to herd animals to safety. Fear was in every face, and chaos spread quickly through the once peaceful village. Elias acted immediately. He had studied the manuscripts carefully and had memorized every hidden path, every safe passage, and every potential danger in the surrounding mountains. Without hesitation, he ran toward the edge of the village, calling out to anyone who would listen. "Follow me, this way." His voice carried over the crackling flames, sharp and commanding. A few villagers, desperate and frightened, looked at him skeptically at first. But seeing the fire grow and recognizing the urgency in Elias' eyes, they obeyed. He led them through narrow paths and hidden trails that bypassed the flames. The manuscripts had shown him safe routes, and he guided each person with calm precision, despite the smoke and heat. As they moved, Elias kept a sharp eye on the fire. He knew that the flames could change direction at any moment, fed by the strong mountain wind. Branches could fall, embers could ignite new patches, and paths could collapse. Every step was dangerous, yet he remained steady, focused, and confident. The villagers began to trust him, realizing that the man they had once feared was their only hope. He guided the villagers to a small clearing, hidden behind thick trees and rocks, far enough from the fire to be safe. They could catch their breath here, though the smoke still stung their eyes and filled their lungs. Some wept quietly, overwhelmed by the fear and the chaos. Others stared at Elias, amazement and gratitude in their eyes. For the first time, they saw him not as the wild mountain man, but as a hero, capable of saving them from disaster. Once everyone was safe, Elias knew the work was not over. The fire was still spreading, and he needed to contain it before it destroyed the village completely. He remembered instructions from one of the manuscripts, which described methods of controlling fires in the mountains using natural barriers and water channels. He quickly led a group of villagers to create small trenches, guiding water from a nearby stream to block the fire's advance. It was grueling work, and the villagers were exhausted, but Elias encouraged them, showing them how to work together and remain calm. Step by step, they began to control the fire. The flames still roared, but their advance slowed, and the worst areas were contained. Elias' knowledge, drawn from the hidden manuscripts and his experience in the mountains, was proving invaluable. Amid the chaos, Elias noticed movement near the tree line. Shadows shifted strangely, and he realized that someone else was observing the situation from a distance. He could not be sure who it was, but the fresh footprints he had seen in the cave came to mind. Perhaps someone else had discovered the secret, or perhaps it was merely a villager curious about his actions. Either way, Elias kept his attention on both the fire and the unknown observer, aware that danger could come from any direction. Hours passed and the fire was finally under control. Smoke still filled the sky, and some cottages had been damaged, but the village had survived. Villagers hugged each other, tears in their eyes, and whispered thanks to Elias, who remained quiet, exhausted but relieved. He knew that this was just the beginning. The fire had revealed how vulnerable the village could be, and he also knew that secrets could no longer remain hidden forever. After the fire, Elias led the villagers back to the village center. He spoke to them calmly, explaining that the mountains held both danger and protection. He shared some of the knowledge from the manuscripts, how certain areas could be dangerous during storms, where paths were safe, and how to observe natural signs that could warn of future hazards. He did not reveal everything, knowing that some knowledge was too powerful to share all at once, but he gave them enough to understand that the mountains required respect and caution. The villagers listened with rapt attention. Some were amazed, others skeptical, but all realized that Elias' guidance had saved them. Children, who had once been warned to stay away from him, now looked up to him with awe. Adults whispered among themselves, acknowledging that they had misjudged the man who had lived on the mountain's edge. Elias' courage, skill, and wisdom had earned their respect, transforming their perception of him forever. Even Sister Agnes, who had watched from the chapel, felt a mixture of relief and astonishment. She had feared the consequences of revealing the secret, but seeing Elias act decisively to save lives gave her hope. She approached him quietly after the chaos had settled. "You did what I could not hope to do alone," she said softly. "No one must know, yet now everyone must remember your courage." Elias nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. The fire had been a test, a sudden trial that forced him to act. It had shown the villagers what was possible when knowledge, courage, and action were combined. But it had also reminded him of the responsibility he carried. The secret of the mountains was not just about history. It was about survival, protection, and the future. In the days that followed, the village began to recover. Farmers rebuilt damaged fences, villagers cleared debris, and small crops were replanted. Yet the fire had left a lasting impression. People spoke more quietly, observed the mountains more carefully, and began to respect the hidden dangers that surrounded them. They looked at Elias differently now, with gratitude and trust, understanding that he was not only their protector, but also a bridge between their world and the mountain's secrets. Elias continued to visit the cave, studying the manuscripts and symbols even more carefully. He realized that while the fire had revealed his ability to act, there was still much to learn. The manuscripts contained information about other potential dangers, paths that could be used in emergencies, and instructions for safeguarding the village in ways that were subtle and practical. He knew that his role as guardian was far from over. He also reflected on the villagers' reactions. Fear had driven some to panic, but trust had guided them to safety. He understood that any future revelation of the secret must be handled with care, blending knowledge with wisdom and courage. The manuscripts were not just tools for survival, they were lessons in leadership, ethics, and responsibility. Elias felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced a crisis and emerged not only unscathed but stronger, more prepared for the challenges ahead. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elias climbed a ridge overlooking the village. The smoke from the fire had long disappeared, but the memory of the chaos remained. He watched the villagers move about their evening routines, their faces tired but hopeful. He knew that he had earned their trust, but he also knew that more challenges would come. The mountains were alive with secrets, and his duty was far from complete. As darkness fell, Elias made his way back to his cabin, the manuscripts safely tucked in his satchel. He sat by the fire, reflecting on the past days. The moral dilemma he had faced, the balance between secrecy and action, had been tested by the fire. He had chosen to act, and in doing so, had changed the lives of the villagers forever. Yet he knew that this was only the beginning. The secret of the mountains still held mysteries, dangers, and knowledge that he had yet to uncover. Elias understood now that courage was not simply the ability to face danger. It was the wisdom to act when action was necessary, even when fear and uncertainty loomed. The villagers had seen that courage in him, and they had responded with trust and respect. The mountains had tested him, the fire had forced his hand, and he had risen to the challenge. But the journey was far from over. He closed his eyes, listening to the distant sounds of the forest and the quiet of the village below. The secret of the mountains remained hidden, yet its presence was felt more strongly than ever. Elias knew that one day the full truth would need to be revealed, but for now he would continue to protect, guide, and prepare. The mountains had chosen him, and he had accepted the responsibility, knowing that the story was only halfway told. The village of Alderwood had slowly returned to its normal rhythm after the fire. Smoke had cleared, fences were rebuilt, and small crops were replanted. But the villagers carried a new awareness of the mountains, a quiet respect for the land that had once been invisible to them. They had seen danger firsthand, and they had seen courage in a way they could not ignore. And at the center of their attention was Elias, the mountain man they had once feared. Elias, too, had changed. The events of the fire had made him realize the true weight of the secret he carried. The manuscripts, letters, and symbols in the hidden cave were not just historical curiosities. They were guidance, warnings, and knowledge that had protected the village for generations. He knew that some truths could never remain hidden forever. Now the villagers had seen that danger was real, and Elias understood it was time for careful revelation. He called a gathering at the edge of the village, where the mountains loomed behind him. Villagers arrived cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Some still remembered the fear of the fire, others the calm precision with which Elias had led them to safety. Children watched curiously, while adults whispered among themselves, wondering how much of the secret would be shared. Elias began speaking, his voice steady and calm. He explained that the mountains were not merely a backdrop to their lives. They were alive in a sense, holding knowledge and protection. He spoke of the cave, of the manuscripts, and of the letters that had guided generations before him. He told them that the fire had shown just a glimpse of the mountain's power and of the importance of vigilance. He did not reveal everything at once, knowing that the full truth could overwhelm the unprepared. Instead, he shared enough to teach respect, caution, and unity. The villagers listened in awe. Some were amazed by the depth of history they had never known. Others were frightened by the dangers Elias described. He spoke carefully, showing them maps and symbols from the manuscripts, explaining safe paths, hidden dangers, and signs that the mountains offered to those who observed carefully. Slowly, a sense of understanding spread among the people. They began to see the wisdom behind Sister Agnes's warnings and the courage it had taken for Elias to act. As he spoke, Elias also revealed parts of the village's hidden history. He told stories of ancestors who had made sacrifices to protect the village, of hidden alliances with travelers from distant lands, and of mistakes that had been carefully concealed. The villagers were shocked, not only by the events of the past but also by the realization that their peaceful life had been built on courage, secrecy, and careful planning. Yet as the shock faded, a quiet pride emerged. They began to see the village as stronger, wiser, and more resilient than they had ever imagined. Among the crowd, Sister Agnes stood quietly, her eyes shining with tears. She had warned the villagers for years, fearing the consequences of revelation. Yet now she saw the careful balance Elias had struck, revealing enough to educate and protect, while keeping the most dangerous knowledge safeguarded. She nodded slightly to Elias, acknowledging that he had fulfilled a duty she could not. Elias also spoke about the importance of responsibility. He explained that the manuscripts were more than just records. They were guides, showing how to use knowledge wisely, how to interpret the signs of nature, and how to respect the mountain's power. He emphasized that courage alone was not enough. Wisdom, patience, and care were necessary to protect the village. The villagers absorbed these lessons, understanding that the secret was not just a story, but a living responsibility that touched their daily lives. After the gathering, Elias led a few trusted villagers to the cave. Together, they explored the manuscripts, maps, and letters in detail. He taught them how to read the symbols, how to navigate the hidden paths, and how to recognize natural warnings that had protected the village for generations. The villagers were amazed at the depth of knowledge stored in the cave. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of their ability to understand or use the information. But under Elias' guidance, they grew confident, learning to respect the secret while using it to safeguard their homes and families. The cave became a place of learning, not just mystery. Elders and young people alike began to visit, taking careful notes, practicing navigation, and observing the mountains with new eyes. Children learned to recognize natural signs and understand the balance between caution and exploration. The village slowly transformed, becoming more aware, resilient, and united. What had once been a dangerous secret now served as a source of strength and knowledge. Despite the progress, Elias remained vigilant. He knew that the secret could never be fully revealed to everyone at once. Some knowledge was too powerful, too dangerous to handle without understanding. He maintained careful control, teaching only what was necessary for safety and respect. In this way, the secret remained a guide rather than a burden, a source of protection rather than fear. Over time, Elias' role in the village became legendary. He was no longer the feared mountain man. He was a guardian, teacher, and symbol of courage. Villagers came to him for advice, guidance, and reassurance. They saw him not as a stranger, but as a bridge between their lives and the hidden power of the mountains. Even those who had doubted him began to rely on his wisdom, understanding that the secret he carried had saved them and would continue to guide them in the future. One day, as Elias sat on a ridge overlooking the village, Sister Agnes approached quietly. The wind rustled her robes and her eyes reflected the fading light of the sun. She spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret herself. "No one must know, yet now everyone must remember," she said. Elias nodded, understanding the meaning behind her words. The secret had been revealed in measured doses, carefully controlled, and now it was woven into the life of the village. Its power would guide them, protect them, and inspire them for generations to come. The villagers began to honor Elias in small but meaningful ways. They built a simple stone marker near the ridge where he had guided them during the fire, a symbol of courage, wisdom, and protection. Children placed small offerings of flowers and stones at the marker, learning to respect the mountains and the knowledge that had saved their village. Adults spoke of Elias with admiration and gratitude, acknowledging that his actions had changed their lives forever. The mountains themselves seemed to acknowledge Elias' role. On clear mornings, the sun glinted off the peaks in ways that made the slopes sparkle. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying messages that only those who paid attention could understand. The villagers began to listen more closely, learning to read the subtle signs of nature, guided by the knowledge Elias had shared. They realized that the mountains were not only a source of danger, but also a source of protection, wisdom, and guidance. Years passed, and the village thrived. The manuscripts and maps were carefully maintained, and the cave remained a place of learning and respect. Children who had grown up under Elias' guidance became skilled at navigating the mountains, observing natural signs, and understanding the balance between caution and curiosity. Adults maintained vigilance, ensuring that the knowledge was used wisely and that the village remained safe. Elias, though older now, continued his watch over the mountains and the village. He remained humble, never seeking recognition, yet the villagers continued to honor him in their hearts and actions. He had begun as a solitary mountain man, feared and misunderstood, but through courage, wisdom, and careful action, he had become a hero, a teacher, and a guardian. In the quiet moments, as Elias sat on his favorite ridge or walked through the forest, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The mountains had tested him, the manuscripts had challenged him, and the fire had forced him to act. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and moral dilemmas, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the village he had chosen to protect. The villagers never forgot the lessons he had taught them. They learned that courage was more than bravery. It was the ability to act wisely under pressure. They learned that knowledge was a tool, not a weapon, and that responsibility carried a weight that required patience and care. They learned to respect the mountains, their history, and the secrets that had protected them for generations. And in the end, Elias' legacy was secure. The mountain man who had once been feared became a symbol of hope, courage, and wisdom. The villagers understood that true heroes are often those who act quietly, thoughtfully, and with unwavering dedication to the safety and well-being of others. The secret of the mountains had changed their lives, but it had also shaped Elias into the man the village would never forget. Even as new generations grew up, the story of Elias and the secret of the mountains lived on. Children learned about the hidden cave, the manuscripts, and the careful guidance of the mountain man. They understood the lessons of courage, responsibility, and respect for nature. And as they played near the river, climbed the hills, or explored the forests, they carried with them the knowledge that bravery was not just about facing danger, but about making the right choice when the time came. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and the mountains were bathed in soft orange light, Elias would sit silently and watch. He knew the village was safer, stronger, and wiser. He knew that the secret he had carried for so long had finally found its place, guiding the people of Alderwood with care, courage, and respect. The mountain man, the nun's warning, and the hidden knowledge had all converged to create a legacy that would endure for generations. And so, the village of Alderwood thrived. The mountains remained a source of mystery and protection. And Elias, the once feared mountain man, became the hero everyone had never expected but always needed. His courage, wisdom, and careful handling of the secret had saved lives, shaped history, and left a mark that would never fade. The story of the mountains, the fire, and the hidden knowledge would be remembered, respected, and cherished forever.